recording. We have no time for this today. The Buddha Dudes is proud to announce that we have our very first special guest in today's episode, which is also the Christmas special and our goodbye for this year. Today, none other than Mathew Endress, also known as Willingdone, is going to talk with us about draw structures and how they interact with spells, kung fu, and other deck building considerations. So enjoy it, have a Merry Christmas, and see you in the new year, where the Buddha Dudes will have a few major announcements to make. So stay tuned, and yeah, let's resume the music. Resume the music, please. Welcome to Buddha Dudes, episode 7. My name is Michael.
And my name is Hans.
And I'm Matthew.
Whoa! Hans, what is going on here? Do I hear another voice on the Ethernet?
Yeah, we have a guest today.
Hi.
And his name is Mathew Endress. And he's also known as Willingdone.
Hey, hello Matthew. Glad to have you on the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
So, Matthew, I'm sure a lot of people are going to know your works for the community of Doomtown Reloaded and other games. But just for those who might not have heard of you before, can you tell us a little bit, what do you do and where can people find you?
I have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Willingdone, and I do review stuff and kind of some entertaining stuff for Netrunner and Doomtown. I do reviews of all the packs that come out and the big boxes and things like that. And I also try to do some kind of strategy, educational sort of stuff as well.
I highly advise for people to listen to that stuff because it's really informative and it's very interesting. And whenever I listen to one of your speeches about the new packs that are out, it just immediately gives me ideas about stuff that I want to build. Because you go you go into cards and you actually talk about synergies and stuff, and not this is an interesting card, next one. There's always some ideas about how you can connect these to archetypes that exist or might be emerging at the moment. It's great stuff.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I try to have a review out usually within a week of the next release. So I think we've got a Doomtown pack coming up pretty soon here. So I'll probably have another review out probably early January or something like that.
Oh, cool. Here in Germany, we are always a little bit late.
Yeah.
Some of the packs or the Pine Box expansion, 1 month late or 1.5 months late.
Yeah. It's the tragedy of life, But still, people should check out your channel. Also, you have gotten quite a few official spoilers for new Doomtown Reloaded cards.
Yeah, AG has been really, really awesome with that. They reached out to me and they liked the reviews I was doing. They gave me some cards, and I'm hoping that they'll do some in the future as well. It's really exciting to be part of that. When I get the spoiler, I'm very excited about it. And oh, look at this card. Oh man. And I try to let it cook for a little bit in my mind so that when I do the preview video, I'm not a ball of energy oh wow, here's this card and it's so cool and we're going to do this thing. I'm trying to have at least one intelligent line to have about it instead of just being really excited. But
you should have seen Hans and me last month when we got our first spoiler. We were like little girls running around oh my god, this is so exciting.
I'm still like that when I get that email, see a spoiler card and I'm kind of wow, I gotta see what this is. Oh wow. It's always really exciting. So
me, I play Android Netrunner and Doomtown Reloaded as well. Can you tell me a little bit, how are your experiences living between those two worlds? How do you do you have to divide your time between those games because they're both so immense?
Yeah, that's a really difficult thing to balance. It's hard to split time evenly with the games because both games, there's really no point where you could put too much time into them or too much thought into them, right? Both games are so deep and complex and have so much going on with the deck building and the strategy, and they're constantly changing as living games or as evolving games, so it's hard to split the time evenly. I feel like I go through kind of periods where this week I'm going to play this game more, and this week I'm going to play this game more. And I guess I don't really have a conscious way of splitting it, but it's kind of more just at the moment what I'm more excited about. But I feel like I kind of oscillate back and forth between both games pretty often. I've definitely played Netrunner a lot more, but Netrunner's also been out longer as well. So I've definitely played Netrunner more, but I think I'm starting to catch up a little bit with Doomtown. I've been playing that a lot lately.
Are you playing at a store or at a bar or at home?
I usually play at home. I have a variety of people I play with. I've played Netrunner online a lot more than Doomtown. We were talking about that a little bit before the show. But for the most part, I play in person. I try to travel to events when I can, but I'm kind of in a lull spot of the U.S., so I have to travel maybe it's usually about an hour to 2 hour drive to get to like a city where there would be a tournament. Okay. So that kind of limits my ability to attend some tournaments, but I wasn't able to go to Worlds for that reason with Netrunner. But playing at home, trying new decks and things like that is a really kind of studious exercise. You know, if you have two people that want to, okay, we're going to test this matchup, and you kind of focus on the matchup and talk about it after the game, I think that's one of the best ways to play these kind of games. I like playing against the same opponents. And it's obviously fun to play against a variety of opponents as well, but the same opponents can be kind of more of a learning exercise, I think.
Oh yeah, very much. It makes you focus on the game so much more. Mm-hmm. Instead of on the people, you know. When I go to my weekly Netrunner meetups, you know, there's always this guy who I know is going to play the jankiest stuff of all time, and the guy who's always going to run everything you advance. So it's like you adapt your play style so much to who you're playing instead of, you know, actually playing within the confines of the game. So
yeah, and I think, you know, Doomtown, you know, it doesn't have face down cards and it doesn't have as overt hidden information. But the information aspect of Doomtown, there can be a lot of surprises in player styles with that as well. You know, if how much cheating punishing is my opponent playing, and which cheating punishing. You know, the cheating punishing tend to have a variety, and they're all really brutal. You know, so you kind of need to know what you're up against if you're up against it. You know, some players really skimp on that, and some players come armed to the teeth against cheating, you know?
Yeah. I think Hans has learned in a very violent kind of style that I always have it's not what you know in my hand. Like, no matter what, it's always
that
there.
Card. That card is so crazy.
Yeah, this week I had a straight flush. I could build a straight flush and with a devil joker. Mm-hmm. So it would have had a hand rank of 11. Mm-hmm. But I didn't dare. So I think I just did a flush.
I think you had a flush or just three of a kind, but it was a huge difference. And this one time I did have no cheating punishment on hand. So I was like, oh yes, super relieved.
I love that tense moment where there's a big shootout and you're trying to decide, well, should I go all the way? Should I cheat here? Mm-hmm. He's got 3 or 4 cards in his hand over there. He's bound to have one of those cheating punisher cards. That's always such a great decision point.
Yeah, I really like that as well.
That's like in an actual shootout, I think. So it captures like the feel of the Weird West.
It's like when you're told like you take 10 paces and then you turn around and then you shoot each other and you're like, is he actually going to take 10 paces?
Yeah.
Or just 9. Or something like that.
Well. Oh, and about, playing Netrunner and Doomtown, I also noticed on myself that I'm kind of falling in and out of love very frequently because of like, just events. Like one day I get my ass handed to me in Netrunner and I come home and I'm like, I'm never going to play Netrunner again. Come on. Let's build some Doomtown decks.
Well, and I think it's really refreshing to be able to move around games like that, I think. If you play with games that are at this level of complexity, as Netrunner and Doomtown, there is kind of a risk of burnout if you play, you go too hard with one of the games and you spend too much time thinking about one of the games. The thing I like about both Doomtown and Netrunner is they're so fundamentally different. There's definitely crossover in terms of the strategy, but their style of thinking that's required for each game is so fundamentally different. Doomtown is a lot more positional and, almost more, I've heard people use the term chess-like a ton of times, but I think that's accurate in some ways. There's a lot of positioning and anticipating the positioning of your opponent's stuff, and in Netrunner, there's definitely anticipation, but there's the positional aspect is not there as much. It's more of kind of a probability. It's more poker than chess, right? Which is kind of funny because I'm saying that Doomtown is the chess in that analogy, but yeah.
Yeah, it's very different. Except recently I played Morgan and I had this new guy. I always forget if it's Shane or Graves. It's one of those two guys who has you pick cards from your enemy's hand and discard an action card. And I was like, I gave him a flamethrower or something and he had like 3 bullets. And I was like, I'm going to draw 3 cards from your hand. This is kind of like a legwork,
Yeah, I think in my review of that guy, I compared him to Duress in Magic. Yeah, I really, really like that effect, or just that idea in Doomtown, the ability to like see your opponent's hands and do things like that. That new Grifter lets you look at their starting hand too. Rico, is that right? Just having that information makes an individual turn of Doomtown more tense, in my opinion. I like knowing that they don't have the cheating card, or knowing that they do have it, for that matter. It really changes the course of a turn if you can see what your opponent has.
Definitely.
Oh man, I never thought about him like that. For me it was always just like, yeah, so you can adapt your starting posse. Wow, big deal, But you're right. That can make quite a big difference.
Yeah, I think in my review of that guy, I really underplayed the looking at the opponent hand aspect. And now that I've actually had that guy in play, and had a little more experience with him, that information you get from looking at the hand is huge. And I'm kind of lukewarm on the changing the starting posse thing around, but the information you get from looking at their hand is pretty significant.
I think it was covered pretty positively at Gomorrah Gazette for this Deed Slide article. So they say, because you can't really discern whether you are facing a Deed Slide deck or not these days, because the bandits, they could be Bandit Slide, they could be not Bandit Slide, and if you can see his first hand, you will you have a pretty good guess what he's actually up to, because if there are like 3 or 4 deeds in his hand, and you will see, this is like not a normal deck, it would be like a Deed Slide deck. They said then you can adapt your starting posse for like 7 influence and actually try to counter it. So,
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because you definitely want to start as much influence as possible against the Deed Slide. It's just going to buy you a lot of time. But like you're saying, it is really difficult to tell. You can't. It's not super easy to tell just by which faction and which outfit, which outfit card they're using, if they're playing the Deed Slide style. But Deed Slide's pretty obvious even if you just see like, their hand or 5 cards or something like that, it's pretty quickly evident that they're playing that style.
Maybe we could go to our first topic. When you play Deed Slide, actually, do you play it as a straight flush deck? No, normally not. Or how many deeds do you play with Deed Slide? So could you play a straight flush deck? No.
I think that with Deed Slide, you're playing so many dudes and deeds that you don't really have a lot of room for other stuff. I mean, you obviously can play something like a draw structure, but the Morgan Cattle Control, which is easily like the oldest of the Deed Slide, maybe the original Deed Slide. I mean, usually those decks play a really soft draw structure. And I think the newer Deed Slide decks, one of the things that they have going for them is that they have a little more like a real draw structure. I mean, it's not a great one, but it's something that can actually get a full house. Whereas like the original Deed Slide, I think, its best value is like 11 or 12 for the most part. 11 or 12 of a particular value for the most part.
As our viewers might have already taken from what we said before, there is a bit of a different structure today because we have a guest. So we're not really going to talk about the flesh parts of our podcast. So there's not going to be Doomtown related fluff. But instead, today we talk about draw structures that are possible in Doomtown Reloaded at the moment. And I think we all agree that the most prevalent one that we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about is the draw structure that has 3 central values and then more or less maxed out the possibilities of having as many cards of that value as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of the default really aggressive strategy, right? Yeah. It's also the easiest maybe to construct because you just pick 3 values and play a lot of those.
Yeah. Also, it's very reliable, so the question is usually not if you have a full house or not, but if you can make it without cheating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And even a lot of times it goes up to a 4 of a kind with that as well. It's I kind of like to draw the distinction between draw structures that are going for full house and draw structures that are going for 4 of a kind. Okay. Even though I think that they're fundamentally the same concept, right? You pick a few values and you play a bunch of those. But I think the full house, you want to play fewer. You don't want to play 16 of each value. You want to play maybe like 14. And a lot of times the full house draw structures, they'll play kind of some secondary numbers where they play maybe like 7, 8, maybe 10 of some secondary numbers. And the nice thing about the full house structure is that your remainder is a lot bigger. So the stuff, you get to play a higher quality set of cards, right? You're not making as many concessions based on the value. Whereas I think if you're going for like the really heavy, like 4 of a kind, 5 of a kind sort of draw structure, you're almost necessarily going to have to play like some bad cards or a bunch of copies of a card that you don't really need, 3 or 4 copies of, just because you want to get enough copies of that value to be able to consistently draw 4 and 5 of a kind.
Yeah, I've been in those situations where I look at an opponent's discard pile and it's like, Roderick Beyer? What are you doing with him? He's like, I'm never going to play him, He's just there for the shootouts.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that definitely happens with deeds and dudes, I think, where you just kind of shoehorn in those because it's just the best option. Or, a lot of times it's like, I need to play a 7 or whatever, so I'm going to pick the cheapest dude that's worth influence that I can play, or, something like that, so a lot of times you end up with kind of subpar dudes if you're building a stronger draw structure. Whereas I think an advantage of what I'm calling the full house structure, which is kind of the weaker version of that same thing, you kind of just you might play like 13 or 14 of a value and you're getting to pick just the best cards of that value. So you're not having to like shoehorn in these last 3 or 4 cards that are on value that aren't as good. And the other advantage of that, of course, is that you don't auto win lowball all the time. I think that's kind of the key problem with, or I guess lose lowball, however you want to think about it. That's kind of a problem with playing like 16 of a bunch of 3 different values, is you're pretty much always going to get in minimum a pair, but more likely like 3 of a kind, 2 pair. You're going to cheat pretty often on lowball. Whereas if you're only playing like 13 or 14 of your key values, I think it's a lot easier to miss those, cheating 3 of a kinds on lowball and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely true. I remember a game, I think I played it in my only shootout tournament that I played, where I was caught cheating and my opponent played bottom dealing. So he replaced my hand with the top 5 cards of his deck. But his deck was shooting quite well too, so it was like, that's a legal 4 of a kind. I guess that's better than your hand before, but hey,
Bottom dealing's always really exciting.
Oh, it's so much fun. It's so well designed. It's amazing. And now that we've got down this prevalent draw structure, I think it's a lot easier to compare different draw structures, like talking about, is it more consistent or is it less consistent, and how likely is it to cheat? So one thing I would like to ask you about the full house structure, because I've never tried that, is it sounds like when you don't only have stud but also draw dudes in a shootout, that it's not always a simple decision what to do with your draw, what you want to discard. Because, when you play a really strong draw structure, it's usually really obvious. So what I do is I count out the cards of my draw structure I have in the discard pile and in the game, like making mental notes. And then I go like, okay, I had the least of this value, so I'm going to discard the other one and hope that there's going to be a lot of those coming up next. So when you have like more different values, I don't know, have you played it extensively? Is there like those situations where you like genuinely don't know what to discard?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. Especially if you're trying to avoid cheating. I think that even makes it more complicated, because if you have, let's say you have, in your first draw, you have 3 of a kind and then a couple other cards that don't pair that are part of your structure. Well, if that 3 of a kind's cheating, do you keep the cheating 3 of a kind and then hope to draw the pair? Because if you do that, you're probably going to end up with a cheating full house. But if you discard one of the cheating cards that's in the trip, you risk getting maybe just like 2 pair or some absolutely awful hand. Yeah. But you can also avoid cheating. So I think that when you play a weaker draw structure, there's definitely the decision making that you make with the cards you discard and draw is a lot more impactful. But at the same time, I think it also makes the draw, guys that draw cards, draw dudes, it makes them better in some ways too, because you have more total cards you're going for, and it's not just like I need one more 8 or I need one more, whatever. You kind of have more options.
Yeah.
Actually, as I'm thinking, I might be playing your, what you call the full house draw structure all along, because normally I don't use 16 cards.
No?
I think it can be kind of dangerous to play 16. I try to avoid playing, I think like 14 or 15 is a lot more comfortable. It seems to have a huge impact on low ball, at least in my experience. Even just cutting, 1 or 2 cards on value. And it's especially true if you're playing to go from 14 to 16. You're playing 2 cards that aren't particularly good cards. If you're just playing like big dudes you can't afford to play, or a deed that doesn't really do anything for you, or a 4th copy of some spell that you really just don't need 2 of in play, stuff like that. It can really improve the quality of your deck to just cut a couple of those and then just play a good card in place of those, just some generically good card, whether it be like a cheap deed that does something, like a club effect that's good in combat, like an unprepared, or it's or a pistol whip. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think a thing which at least I didn't really discover yet, like how to really do the trade-off between the cards and the draw structure.
It's really tricky.
Yeah.
Maybe, and when you are saying like the 15th or 16th card have an impact on low ball, that you should be running some math on it. If it's like really the case, or if you're like only, sometimes one can be tricked by oneself when
that's true.
When there's like 3 or 4 low ball events where you really would like to have losing the low ball or winning the low ball, and so maybe one should calculate something.
Well, it also depends on how much your deck can capitalize on winning low ball or getting to go first, right? Like if I never know how to talk about low ball,
So let's say what did we use most? Let's say winning low ball means you actually have the better hand, so you lose the money.
Okay, so you want to lose low ball. But then wait, you're the winner.
Yeah, but no, the winner is the one who lost the... Okay, so... yeah, I can see where this gets complicated. No, okay, you're right. Winning lowball means you had the worst hand, and so you are the winner in rules terms. So you... Yeah, let's just leave it at that before it gets derailed again by me.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that, some decks can really capitalize on that, especially if you have like powerful shootout effects. If you have powerful goods cards that do stuff, like shotgun or whatever, those decks can obviously capitalize on winning low ball a lot more than maybe a more control oriented deck.
Yeah. And also like fast decks. So when I play Eagle Wardens, it's usually really important that I'm the first one to go to Town Square, so I can start doing all my mojo and drawing cards and stuff without anybody calling me out. So actually, I think my draw structure in my Eagle Wardens deck is way too good, because I always lose low ball and then I'm angry because I can't go to Town Square anymore.
Well, yeah, maybe cut a couple of the value or a couple of the on value cards and then just play some good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed I have way too many spirits, because it sounds so awesome to have all these ancestor spirits, and then you go like, man, I already have 2 of those in play. I don't really need more. It's a very tricky thing to balance that stuff.
But you want to draw one early in the game, so you need to play 3 or 4 of them to make sure you draw one early in the game. Yeah, it's really tricky. There's a lot of tug of war with the deck building in Doomtown. You know, lots of risk reward, and the deck building is just so beautiful in this game.
Yeah, it's very exciting. So for other draw structures that are possible, Hans and me have done some research, and actually just a very tiny amount of research, because all we were able to figure out in our time playing Doomtown Reloaded was just one variant for draw structures, and that's a straight flush. So we've been toying around with that recently. I've built a straight flush Desolation Row deck, and
I built a 108 Bandits straight flush deck.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think the most important thing to say about the straight flush decks is they're almost always on clubs, right?
Oh, yes. Because there is nothing that is as much fun as having 5 deeds in your hand and going like, well, I'm not going to play those in a long time.
Yeah, you could do a deed slide.
Yeah, of course. Deed slide, yeah. But still, so yes, we both picked the clubs because, you know, you have them in your hand, you can almost always play them, and they help you in shootouts a lot. So it's like very versatile, and you can be doing a lot of daring plays because, you know, I have a Flight of the Lepers in hand, so if things go really wrong, you know, I just panic out there. That's what we've been playing. And one thing I think I read on the internet as a starting point was like this very simple idea of having some kind of a bell curve. Because, you know, for a straight flush, you need, of course, 5 values next to each other. It makes sense to play more than 5 different values, but then the values in the middle, you need to have more of, because those are always going to be part of your chain of 5s. Right. Whereas the ones on the edges, you know, you can either go on the low or you can go on the high end of your chain of values. So usually I played with 2 at the lowest and the highest value, and then 3. And then having 3 or 4 values in the middle, which are maxed out with 4 cards each.
Oh, I think it's all also calculated on Board Game Geek by, how is it called? Hayate's probability primer. There he calculates whether what's the advantage of having like the highest and the lowest cards also filled up. And there's not such a big impact. So you really can cut some cards loose on the highest and lowest level.
Well, and if you play, you know, if you're going for a straight flush and you play more than 5 cards in sequence, right? Like you play like 6 sequence values, that also gives you a bigger variety of effects you can play, right? Because the clubs aren't just, they do useful things, right? They're not just for the shootouts. So being able to cut or play fewer values of, or fewer copies of certain values lets you also play more useful cards overall, because you're not filling your deck full of stuff just for the purpose of value.
Oh, that's definitely true. In my straight flush deck, I wanted to start with 6 as my lowest value because of mad science reasons. And then I went like, but I really want Pistol Whip, you know, it's freaking amazing. So I had to make some compromise there, and I included some Pistol Whips as well. So yeah, it's awesome to have this huge range of possible club effects.
I think I really liked the decks we played, and they're really fun because you have all these kind of effects.
Yeah, there's always something happening.
It's not like boring playing deeds, but you really can, like in a shootout, you're well prepared and.
Or you are unprepared.
Or you're unprepared.
Your opponent is definitely unprepared.
Yeah, and like in the Kung Fu deck, you have like, you can build like really long chains. You have always Kung Fu cards in your hands, and that was pretty awesome.
Man, that was so tense. You know, one game we played, it was the game I talked about earlier, where I drew 3 cards from Hans's hand, and I was able to discard 1 action card, and I was like, I got your Kung Fu card, now your dude can't do anything, and then he just had another one that I didn't see, and I was like,
Well, I think going back to why the straight flush decks usually play clubs, I think a big reason for that is that over the course of the game, your draw structure is going to get stronger in the sense that you're going to remove cards from your deck by playing them that aren't clubs, right? So all of the non-club effects are the ones that sit in play permanently, or, when you play them, they stay in play. So you're basically removing them from your deck. So over the course of the game, the concentration of the club effects gets higher in your deck, and therefore your draw structure gets stronger. But if you tried to do straight flush with diamonds, then you would have to avoid playing deeds in order to maintain your draw structure, which I think isn't apt to work as well as the club.
That's effect. Very concise.
They clock your hand, and you have like 3 deeds on your hand, and you aren't allowed to play them, and you have a bad day.
Yeah, we went as far in our limited experience as to say that it is very good in straight flush decks to not only play the other cards, but sometimes have effects that actively degenerate your draw structure. So I started to include buried treasure, just so I can, ace some deeds that I'm not going to play anymore, like maybe a deed I have in my deck 2 times or something. Because it's funny how rarely you actually make the straight flush. Because your deck is full of clubs, but then even with a few stud and a bit of draw, it's very rarely that we ever had a straight flush turn up.
Yeah, and I think that that buried treasure, specifically that card, has really opened up a lot of space for some of these alternative draw structures.
The problem is, since buried treasure is out and I like to play it in my decks, I always have to include Undertaker as well, although it's off value because it's just so amazing to ace a dude from your discard pile and then you're rich. It's it's so nice.
There's been that deck floating around on Doomtown DB that is the Dead Man's oriented deck that uses the buried treasure as well. I think buried treasure has just opened up a lot of opportunity to play these kind of, I guess you could call them like evolving draw structures, or maybe like 2-step draw structures where, early in the game, your draw structure is not going to be as strong because you have a lot more cards in your deck that aren't on the draw structure. But after you've been through the deck one time, or, even 2 times, you've really, really reduced the number of cards in your deck that aren't on your draw structure. So you're just gonna get way stronger with your draws as the game goes on.
Yeah. When you take your straight flush draw structure and you have maybe 3 values that are completely filled, and then you have like 3 and then you have 2 on the edges, that's only 22 cards. So you still have like a lot of deck to fill up. I guess there is different ways of doing that. For myself, I kind of had this backup plan with like regular draw structures. So, the cards that were still available would probably be on the same value as my most played clubs. So in the case of an early shootout and my deck is not yet ready to generate straight flushes a lot, then I would just go for 7s or something and hope that you don't lose too hard.
Yeah, and I think that really enforces the idea of like the 2-step draw structure, right? Because it's like early in the game, you have this sort of like full house, 4 of a kind sort of draw structure. But then as you play those cards that are on that full house value, you're going to get better at the straight flushes. Yeah. And I think a lot of the Dead Man's decks do the same idea, right? Just playing, you basically flesh out some of the values that are on your main draw structure. And you can usually do that with useful cards because it's going to be dudes, deeds, and equipment or goods or spells. So those are almost always going to be something that's beneficial outside of just the value aspect.
We don't have a lot of experience with Deadman's hand stacks, but the one thing we learned is it's so hard to be so disciplined that you don't play your jack of diamonds, for example, because it's like a Jackson strike and it's cheap.
Exactly.
It's efficient. You're like, I can't play this. I need it.
This is 2 money and it's out of town and it's going to give me 2 income the rest of the game. And
oh boy. No.
Yeah, that can be tricky.
You don't do it. It's one piece of advice. If you play Deadman's Hand, you don't play any of the cards that are part of the Deadman's Hand, except for maybe Stephen Wiles or something, because he's going to be in the discard pile next turn.
Yeah, and you can also play, there's a few, not many, but there's a few ways to get wild cards. like Pair of Six shooters is kind of that. And that would be on ace for Deadman's.
Yeah.
So there are a few ways that you can kind of make up for not drawing the Jack of Diamonds, or having played the Jack of Diamonds even. Another thing that I think is interesting about the Deadman's and to some extent the straight flush is that you usually want to play a bunch of copies of a particular card that's on value. Like if you're going to play Ace of Spades, it's probably worth it to just play like 3 or 4 of the same card at Ace of Spades, because you don't actually want to play those down. So if you get into a situation where you need to play one of those down, you want it to be the most useful card at that value, right? Yeah. Whereas with most decks and most standard draw structures, you would want to play a variety. You want to play a spread. Like you don't want to play 4 of the same Ace of Spades usually. Whereas with Deadman's, I think it's okay to just play like 4 of the same Jack of Diamond, or 4 of the same Ace of Spades, just whatever the most useful card at that value is, because you're only going to play that card down in a pinch anyway.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very, very good thought. When I played my straight flush deck, I also found that usually I have this weird mental aversion of playing multiple copies of the same deed. Because I go like, but there's so many deeds, and this one, I'm just going to be able to play one of them. But in my straight flush deck, it's no problem having like 2 or even 3 Circle M wrenches, because it's so amazing. And I know I'm going to play it. And the ones that I'm not going to play, I'm going to ace out of my deck in some other ways, with some tricks that the deck has. So it's good to have this critical card that you really want at the time you need it then.
Yeah, especially Circle M Ranch, because that deed is just such a great start to the game.
I think one day we're going to make an episode about why this card is so terribly broken.
It's got to be the best deed, right? I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but it's definitely like top 2 or 3 no matter what.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so that's kind of what we found out with straight flush. And it's like, we talked about decisions you have to make when you're forming your hand in a shootout. In the first stage of the straight flush, it's very much that. I had a lot of situations where I thought, well, maybe this could become a straight flush if I draw the right cards. But then again, I also have a few of this one value that I'm playing as an emergency out. So it was always really hard to know what to discard. Go for the straight flush and maybe fail spectacularly. Or just, go with the safe 2, 3 of a kind, maybe full house.
Yeah.
It's so hard. But, then you have a lot of clubs in your hand, so maybe you can just Flight of the Lepus anyway if you don't get beaten fair and square, at least.
I think there's a lot of similarities between the Deadman's and the straight flush draw structures, because they're both kind of like they're like chunks of the deck where it's kind of this secondary grouping of cards that you're going to try to preserve and draw more frequently. And I think you get into that same tough decision-making point that you're talking about where, well, am I going to actually go for my real draw hand, or am I going to just kind of settle for this other one?
With both draw structures, you have to have a rather slow deck. Otherwise, the game wouldn't last long enough. I think with my Deadman's Hand deck, we never got to the point where actually the deck was degenerated enough that you would consistently draw the Deadman's Hand and really make like all the effort you put in would really improve your play.
I think it's difficult to both degenerate the deck so that you end up with that kind of pure Deadman's or really frequently Deadman's, and still have the ability to get enough stud and draw that you can do that. It's really difficult to build a deck that can do that, and that's why I think Deadman's isn't particularly popular. Because it's just so hard to build a deck that can both put up good shooters that are going to draw you enough cards that you're going to find that good draw structure, and then also build a deck that can actually play out all the non-Deadman's cards and maybe use like Buried Treasure to ace stuff, or like the Eagle Wardens or things like that. And it's just really hard to like put all of that stuff into one deck. You just run out of deck slots.
Okay, so you would say that the straight flush or dead man's hand draw structure lend to a particular playstyle, which is kind of control-y. Mm-hmm. So you're probably not going to build a straight flush rush deck.
You could, but it would probably be better to not focus on straight flush. It seems to me like it would be, if you're going to build, like, say, a really aggressive Sloan or something like that, I think it would almost always be better to just kind of front load your draw structure. With those decks, you want to do damage really early. So you don't really want to make decision-making or card choices at the deck building level that aren't going to benefit you early in the game. And that's kind of fundamentally what you're doing with the straight flush draw structure, is you're making deck building decisions that are more long-term. Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably why that's the case. It's just kind of a mismatch of strategy with your tactics.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah.
I always feel dirty when I play rush decks. It's like I have the same thing in Netrunner. I go like, no, I want to play, the fair game where everybody can show his deck, and then you just find out which one is better for some reason or something.
Well, I think there's one aspect that we talked about a little bit before the show that we haven't really brought up yet, which is how spells and kung fu and gadgets and all that kind of stuff fits in there as well. In with your draw structure, because Doomtown's a game where you don't just have limitations with the fact that you have to build a draw structure. You also have limitations where if you want to use certain effects, you have to tailor your deck in a certain way. You have to pull high, or you have to pull low, or you have to not pull clubs, or you have to, X, Y, or Z. And that can really, I think that lends itself to certain types of draw structures as well. Mm-hmm. Like, definitely. You can't do straight flush in the gadget deck, right? Because or if you do, you're going to lose quite a few really good gadget effects because you're playing so many clubs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Actually, I was trying to build around that with a Desolation Row deck that would have Margaret Haggerty, I think is her name, in the starting posse. Mm-hmm. She's the mad scientist who is really good at making gadget dudes and not very good at anything else. Mm-hmm. And I had 4 copies of the Ratchet in this deck. I would try to get a Ratchet in the very first turn, so I could send him to the town square and do the job, so I get a lot of money and stuff, and it's hard to oppose him because he's a 4-stud. But then that very much dictated where my straight flush structure had to lie. Mm-hmm. Because, it's just so brutal when you don't make your mad science pull and your money goes to the waste and your card goes to the discard pile. It's just, it's the worst feeling.
That type of consideration, like the gadget sort of consideration, that's huge even outside of these kind of specialty draw structures. Like outside of the straight flush and the dead man's, like even if you're just doing kind of one of the easy draw structures, mm-hmm. You might have to play like 6 or higher or 8 or higher or something like that. And, one of the challenges with that, especially when it comes to like spell casting, is a lot of times some of the best spells are really low values. Like Soul Blast, I think, is the quintessential example. Mm-hmm. So you have to really make some choices there. And I've seen, a lot of people don't even want to play Soul Blast because they're worried that they're going to fail the pull. And but it's at the same time, you play that in your deck and you have Shadow Walk. Well, that's going to be a really good effect.
Yeah, that's right. That's a very nice piece of balancing on account of, AEG. Mm-hmm. Having this very, very potent spell, having just the worst possible value that the spell could have. So you always have to weigh, its effect with the probability that you're just going to fuck up your draw.
Yeah. Well, I talked a little bit about how I thought that there were some spells that are like the easy spells and some that are the hard spells.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And where the easy spells are the ones where the pull requirement, like the, Miracle 6 or whatever, that is equal to or lower than the value of the card. So, like some cards, the value of the card itself is lower than the pull requirement. So that's going to mean that you need to play like Blessed 1 or 2. Mm-hmm. I think Dumbstruck is the quintessential example of that. It's an 8 value, but you have to pull 9. So you have to have a Blessed 1 in order to really be able to cast that spell, especially if you want to play 8s or any real number of 8s.
Definitely, yeah. Or like Soul Blast. If we really want to Soul Blast some dude, then you better have some jacks, queens, and kings.
Yeah, of course. So I think those, specifically those hexes, Soul Blast and Paralysis Mark, that don't have a target value by themselves, but the target value is dictated by who you point it at. I think those are always kind of considered hard spells because, you know, it's rarely that you can just blast away an ace dude or something. Most of the time, you can't just play aces with Soul Blast and hope it's going to work out.
Definitely not.
Yeah, unless we get a really, really good hex slinger later on, a huckster with like huckster 6 or something, then maybe it could be possible. But I think 4 is the biggest value on that now, right? Smiling Tom,
and even
I don't think
brutal.
And I don't know how much you really want to start Smiling Tom in your.
No, I once played against a guy who started with Smiling Tom. He wasn't happy.
Going back to Paralysis Mark for a second, that's definitely like the type of effect where you want to pull high. And I think that it also really incentivizes you to play queens to some respect, because if you play queens and you have Huckster 1, you're going to be able to boot everybody.
Yeah.
Without other card effects that interrupt that. So like, that really makes you want to not only just play high pulls, but play like the highest pulls possible. Right. So it's not just like with some spells where you need to play like 6 or higher or 8 or higher. This is, you actually need to play like the highest value you can. There are a few cards I think in the game that are kind of like that.
When I'm building like hex-based decks, like I think Jack, Queens, and Kings are really good cards, or really good numbers, or values. You should say values. So I think it was never a big problem for me. Well, actually, I like the Kings.
It depends on what kind of spells you want to cast. Yeah, for example, if you play Blessed, then a lot of the really interesting spells are in this mid-range between 6 and 9. So you really have to figure out what values you want to play. Yeah,
and I think that's why everybody ends up playing Blood Curse, right? Because it's on value and it's a really awesome spell.
Yeah, it's super strong.
I think maybe something that we didn't talk about a whole lot is the way that building your deck around spellcasting is also inclusive of your starting posse. Like the constraints that you get from building around spells also are constraints around your starting posse. Like I used that Blessed 1 example with Dumbstruck. Like you have to have a Blessed 1 guy to be able to cast Dumbstruck. I think that's a really interesting way that the spells have an effect on deck building as well. Is like with some spells or certain strategies, you're going to end up having to play a certain level of skilled on your caster. Right, it's got to be 1 or better or something like that.
Yeah.
I think the gadgets, it's even a little more pronounced because they have like 2 and 1 and even 3 and I think there's a 4 as well.
Still, to this day, my favorite deck to play is the Gadgetorium deck. And in there, it's a very aggravated problem because before inventing a gadget, I always have to think, what cards are in my deck? Can I use my ability and increase the difficulty of the pull by 2 without getting into trouble? And for that, I've built the deck so that it's always possible to make the pull. So I don't have any cards that are going to sabotage it as long as I use a Mad Scientist too. So I need to keep Kyle Wagner alive. If he's gone and I only have Mad Scientist 0, it's like, yeah, I could try it, but it's kind of 50-50, You don't really know if it's going to work.
One of the cool things about the Morgan gadgets is you have quite a few guys that you can choose from at the Mad Scientist 2.
Oh, yeah.
And Kyle is the easiest one to play because he's no upkeep and he's cheap. But you also have, William Specs? Is that the guy's name?
He's in my starting posse as well. He's awesome.
Yeah, he's got this economy effect, and then he's also the high Mad Scientist. The upkeep's really the only problem with him, but that is, you easily save the upkeep in his reducing the cost of stuff.
You just build a Circle M wrench with him first turn, and you're golden.
Yes. Well, I think that's true for a lot of decks, though. Circle M Ranch, or like there's a handful of deeds that, like, if you get them going early in the game, it's awesome. General Store, Circle M Ranch, Jackson Strike, and any of the big income deeds.
Blake Ranch.
Yeah, Blake Ranch. That's another good one.
I think Kung Fu works like really different. I'm playing like the Kung Fu deck now since it's gotten out actually.
Yeah.
And you really build decks differently because you don't have a fixed number, because you have like a lot of Kung Fu guys who have maybe like a value plus Kung Fu of 5, 6 or 7 or even of 3 or something. And you have to include all of them. But during the game, you really have to decide whether you take the risk to attack with a small guy and do a pull, which you maybe would only make on a 30% chance or something. And I think Kung Fu is really, really different, or at least that's how I play it. Because you really can't, you can't really enforce like in Michael's more Gadgetorium deck. You can't really enforce to get like all your pulls, because this doesn't work with Kung Fu.
Yeah.
So actually, I think from the design perspective, Kung Fu is a little bit more elegant than because it's really you have to keep it open and not like close the deck to the point that you only like draw like 10 and up or something.
Yeah.
So that makes it really like fun to play. Although you sometimes draw like your big Kung Fu power, which is on a Jack or on a 10 or something. But this is also like the major thing. So you have to include it, and it's like kind of that's like similar to the Soul Blast thing.
Well, and the other really, really big difference with Kung Fu is you're not trying to pull high. So like the section of the card pool that you end up using is the lower end of the value range, right?
Yeah.
Whereas for the most part, decks that are concerned with pulling stuff, they tend to play the higher end of the value spectrum. So there's like a set of effects that a whole ton of decks play, like your unprepareds or it's who you know or things like that. These higher value effects that are just kind of awesome in a lot of contexts. Well, you don't necessarily want to play those in Kung Fu because you need to pull low. So I think that decks that encourage you, or just the concept of pulling low rather than high, really changes like the subset of the card pool that you're actually looking at and considering for deck building, which is just so different than like the spell casting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, that kind of got me worried about Kung Fu in the beginning a bit. Because, in the beginning of Doomtown, I thought like, okay, so the idea is that the low cards usually have a really awesome effect. Like, you have Coach Whip and maybe, Pistol Whip and that kind of stuff. But then when you play stuff where you need to pull, you need to include the really high values. And apart from It's Not What You Know, on Queens, for example, there is some really questionable cards there, like cards like Mist or, I don't know, Secret Tunnels or something that are high pulls. They're not usually the most impactful clubs in the game. But then with Kung Fu, it's kind of reversed because, now you can play Coach Whip. Oh, hell yeah, you can.
Yeah, I really, really like it. We really only saw that with the legendary holster kind of thing, right? Prior to Kung Fu.
Oh, yes. That's right.
And so now Kung Fu is kind of this whole strategy and faction that's kind of based around this, not exactly legendary holster, but that sort of concept. Having there be decks that want to pull high and low, and then of course decks that don't care about pulls, that really keeps the design space open. You can print some awesome effect that's king, and it would be something that would be awesome for Kung Fu, but it's difficult for them to play it because it's a high value, and that definitely already exists a ton with the lower value effects.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I think I have since reassessed my my idea of low cards being the better ones, because now you have a lot of good high club cards like, I don't know, Flight of the Lepus and the It's Not What You Know that we talked about. So, I don't know, they probably, bust this design space wide open, and now, you can design a lot of stuff.
Talking about values in general, I think one of the really exciting things about the game right now is that we're starting to get to the point where dudes and deeds have a huge spread. Like on any given value of deed, there's like 3 or 4 deeds you can play.
Yeah.
same thing with dudes. And, obviously at some point we're going to get to, I don't think we're there yet, but we're probably pretty close, where every single value within within diamonds and spades has like a spread of 4 cards. I think we're pretty close to that now. At least with the dudes, it gets a little tricky because playing out of faction dudes can sometimes not be possible, but depending on what it is. But, that's really exciting from a deck building perspective when we have this like spread of cards at a given value.
Yeah, very much. You mentioned this possibility to play multiple copies of the same card when you don't have to play all of them down. That's going to change a lot, once you have like so many different options on any given value. I think it's going to be less and less attractive to play multiple copies of cards.
Yeah, unless the card is like absolutely instrumental to your deck, like if there's some tricky deed or some tricky dude that's like the core of what you're trying to do, I could see playing multiples. But I do think that you're right that over time there'll be less incentive to just play a bunch of the same card, because you'll be able to play a couple different cards that do kind of similar things or serve maybe a couple different roles rather than just playing one card.
We had a competition on the last podcast about your most harrowing experience. And we wanted people to send in stories of what their most harrowing game was in whatever way they deemed appropriate. And actually, it was kind of a harrowing experience for us as well, because there was exactly one person who sent in a story. So, congratulations to Muad'Dib, because, you won the contest. We're going to send you a art print of Stone, the quintessential harrowed guy. So Muad'Dib wrote to us, "Howdy partners. I'd have to say my most harrowing experience so far playing Doomtown Reloaded was at my first tournament. It was just after Election Day Slaughter was released, and I thought a Morgan Kettle deck with Ridden Down and Run 'em Down was a surefire way to trample horseless dudes into the ground and gallop my way to victory. But I was more wrong than finding a piece of horse meat in your lasagna. I might have to edit that out. By the end of the day, all I had was dead dudes in Boot Hill and piles of rotting horse flesh. After that traumatic day, the mere sight of horses would trigger a panic attack. I had to be careful when flipping through channels not to land on a horse race, a western, or even an episode of My Little Pony. I would suddenly break down and have to explain to my wife why the sight of Twilight Sparkle would make a grown man cry. I never thought the darkness would end until I listened to your 4th podcast. You mentioned singing Tori Amos' song Horses. If you were to sing this, it could bring joy to all the downtrodden Doomtown players out there who thought a horsey deck might work." And then you also included the lyrics of the horse song by Tori Amos, most herald, Corey Muad'Dib. So, Corey, thank you very much for sending in that.
Yeah. Actually, I'm still working on my horse deck.
Yeah, the dream is alive. The dream is alive.
And even now we got our own faction.
Yeah, it's an outfit.
Yeah, an outfit, yeah. So we got the horse outfit. Yeah, and I played some games with it.
Yeah, it was not so bad, actually.
Yeah.
But I think it still has some way to go. And, Matthew, now that with you we have some kind of a voice of the Doomtown community who has a lot of weight to it, can you please tell Hans that Fresh Horses is still a bad card?
Yeah, I have to admit that I too have tried to do the horse deck, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I've really found a good way to do it. And I have to say, Hans, I don't think Fresh Horse is a very good card.
Thank you so much. You heard it here first, everybody.
Okay, I think I will still go for it.
Okay.
But it doesn't matter.
So, Corey, we're going to send you this art print. I am absolutely sorry to admit to you that I haven't prepared the horse lyrics song yet. So, I'm a musician by trade, so I'm going to do this, I promise you, in one of the next 2 podcasts. I'm going to sing the song. But as of now, I don't even know what the melody is like. But there's going to be...
I can sing it right now, but I don't.
Okay. Well, anyway. So, Matthew, is there anything else you would like to tell to the community of Doomtown Reloaded? At least the part of the community that's listening to this podcast right now.
I've been really excited about the amount of discussion that's gone into the game lately. I feel like the community has gotten very like strategy oriented and very in depth in the last, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months. And I think there's kind of been a coalescing of minds. People have kind of been working on the same ideas. So I'm really excited about the future of not only like competitive play for the game, but just the future of the deck diversity, I think, is the main thing. It just seems like a lot of people have been trying a lot of different really out there ideas. And it seems like almost every day I get on Doomtown DB and there's some really weird idea that is like, wow, this is crazy enough, it's probably going to work, So I think that the player base for Doomtown is very studious. They think a lot about the deck building process, and they're willing to do some math and kind of really think in depth. And they're also willing to try really out there ideas. Mm-hmm. And that I don't necessarily think that the Netrunner community is not capable of that. They definitely are. But I think that with Netrunner, there's a lot more set in its ways sort of ideas, because the game's been going longer and there's kind of more of a core card pool. Whereas I think with Doomtown, there's a few decks that are like the really core essential decks. But I think that there is still a ton of room for those to get bumped out of the way and new decks to emerge. And there's just a lot of really interesting ideas floating around. The last few months, we got so many new cards and so many new good additions to the game that I don't know if we've really caught up with that yet. I don't know if we've gotten to the point where we fully understand what all the different strategies are capable of.
Definitely not. At least not on our side.
Yeah.
Or in mine.
There's still like half of the light shineth where I haven't even tried the cards. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe there is a deck, with a new 4th ring outfit, a Sanitarium. Mm-hmm. But I just didn't have the time to try it. So there's a lot of ideas flying around. And yeah, we're going to have to figure out a lot of stuff, I think, before we get there.
Well, and the Light Shineth, that box was just such an awesome influx of expansion of existing ideas. It was like a little bit of stuff for this deck, a little bit of stuff for this deck, a little bit of stuff for this other deck. There was a lot of fleshing out of strategies in that box. I think that's my favorite Doomtown release overall.
I think, Matthew, that is about the perfect words to end a podcast. So thank you again very much for being here. We are proud to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It was fun.
So, I think that's us
about it, yeah.
Signing off. Thank you for listening to this podcast. You can send your feedback, comments, or questions to booteddudes@gmail.com or facebook.com/booteddudes, all in one word. Music used with kind permission from Wellbad. You can find them at wellbad.de or facebook.com/wellbadmusic. If you like this podcast, please consider writing a review on iTunes with or without text, because it helps other people find this podcast when they are looking for Doomtown Reloaded stuff. We'll meet again in the next year when the Booted Dudes go into the 2nd season. See you then.
Yeah.